Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week. And it's hard to believe 2020 is just flying by. It is just going quickly, just like every year and every day does. But the nice thing is we appreciate you coming here and listening to the Charge Podcast, getting some information that you then can implement and take action in your life. And that's really the key. How can we take action on what we learn? As we go into 2020 and this new decade, what are you doing to take action? Because it's great to hear information, but it's more important about the action that we want to take. And that kind of resonates with our podcast because it's the Charge Podcast. And Charge has an acronym, as you know, of create habits around real goals every day. Those habits allow us to get that success and allows us to take that action. Well, today we've got another great guest for you, and I'm so glad you decided to join us because she's got over 30 years of experience as a management consultant, executive coach, and facilitator. And her name is Liz Kislik. She has helped clients solve their thorniest problems while strengthening their top and bottom lines. She is a frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Entrepreneur, and a TEDx speaker on why there's so much conflict at work and what you can do to fix it. Now, we're going to have some great conversation because I love talking about conflict because most people want to not have conflict, Liz. Instead, it's better when you approach it straight up. So welcome to the podcast today.
Glad to be with you, Gary.
Well, we are so excited to share with you and have you share some information with our audiences because we know there's people that's listening. If you're in the workplace, let's be honest, there's going to be some conflict that comes with that. But before we go into our conversation, I always ask each guest the same question because it's my mantra. It's what the Charge Podcast is named after. Create habits around real goals every day. And I love getting from each guest, what habit or habits do you think has led to success in your life?
For me, I think they've mostly been habits of mind as opposed to habits of behavior. And I think the first one I've had since I was a very young child, and it's curiosity. I want to know. I want to know everything. I want to know why. I want to know who. I want to know how. And that gets you revved up and ready to go because who knows what you're going to learn today. So that's the first one. And the second one that also I've had since I was very young is a habit of cheerfulness because the day just goes better if you feel positively and are upbeat and have a kind of, I don't know if I'd call it happy, but positive, cheerful energy about you makes things go better with other people, not just with yourself. Yeah. And the third habit that I practice all the time really did not come to me until I was probably in my 30s. And that's a habit of compassion, about consciously looking for ways not only to be helpful to other people, but to think the best of them, to look for the good in others all the time, because that too makes you feel more positively about everything that happens.
Well, I love those three, and what a great time to do it because we're in the new year and people are getting started trying to build some momentum for themselves. And they've said, I'm sure that I want to be more positive, or I want to have more curiosity. I want to be happier. I love the word joy sometimes to use in that. at that area. And then compassion, of more understanding of other people. And I think that really sets us up well as we're going to go into communication and conflict and some of the challenges that can go there. One of the things, Liz, I would ask you is, we're going to go to, and we're going to talk some about that conflict and communication side of it. But the big thing is, if you want to have a highly productive culture, and I first want you to kind of, if you don't mind, define that in your terms, because I have my own terms, because I like speaking on culture too. But one of the things that happens, you can have that highly productive culture unless you really are willing to understand the other situations and understand the differences in people. So let's start off with the highly productive culture. And what does that mean to you? And why do you think that is so important?
Okay, great. So to have a highly productive culture, I think you have to be conscious of several things at once. It's not just one thing. You need to know where you are going. What is your intention, purpose, goals, vision? There has to be a future orientation, something you can then perform either toward or against the way you think about that. Are you going against your goal to get there, or are you going toward it as a way to motivate yourself and reach what you're trying to accomplish? If you don't have those kinds of things in mind, and you don't have to have a big business plan, but you have to know what you want, at least to some extent, or you're just floundering around. So that's the first thing. And then I'm going to pick up on the communication theme already, because you have to be able to explain that. Declaring it is not enough. Just making a proclamation only has meaning for you. For other people to get it, and the culture is not just you, it's what you do, but it's also what everybody else does. So making sure that your communication is detailed enough and also tailored enough to all the different kinds of people in your audience, so that they become aligned with the purpose and goals and vision as you've laid them out. So you need that match. That's really tight. And then there's the behavior piece.
The tough one.
Yeah. Yes, because we can have lots of thoughts, but what we do is what really counts. And the behavior, okay, I probably want to go in 6 directions on this, and I'm going to try to limit myself. The behavior is, first of all, just the normal stuff that your parents and your grandparents and, golden rule, I like the platinum rule myself better than the golden rule, do unto others as they would be done unto. That hooks in with my habit of compassion. What do they need to be able to help you reach your goals? Can't just shove it down their throats. But also, are you real with each other? And this goes to the communication and also to the conflict. Are you comfortable putting it on the table so that everybody knows where you're at and what you think about what's going on? I think that's probably enough for a start.
Sure. I just love how you set it up, because, you're really talking about where you're going. Are you expressing that? And one thing I would tell you, if you're a leader or for yourself, all these work, as we talked about the end of last year on several of our blogs about setting your goals and setting where do you want to go. So it works for the individual. So the person that's sitting here and saying, well, I'm not really a leader. You are a leader, because you're a leader of self first. So it's not about title we're talking about. It's about how do you want to lead your life that's there. And then when you talk about, those communicating of really how do we communicate with them, I came up with a saying that I always use when I'm working with audiences about communication, Liz, and it's communication is simple. It's the communicating that is difficult, because we say a lot, but, does the other person resonate it there? And I really like how you talk about your behaviors, how you've got to make it real and come back. And I think this plays right into it, because now it's looking at that team, and here as leaders, and again, you may be leaders of your household or a leader of a department or an area that you're listening to. how as a leader do we create those highly productive teams? Because of course they've got to know the goals. They've got to know the behaviors. Of course, what do they need to do? And they've got to communicate that message. And I know one mistake I've made in the past as my leadership when I had a large team is you think you've communicated and you do it once. It has to be pretty repetitious. I know that's one of the areas, but I'm just curious what you think to get that highly productive team. What allows everyone to get on that same page? Because when they are, it's kind of like rowing a boat. If they're all in sync, of course, they get a lot farther than the group that someone's behind. And even if they're behind by just a millisecond, makes a big difference. So share with me what you believe in highly productive teams, what leaders need to do there.
I want to go back to something you said, Gary, because I think it is so meaningful. You can't truly lead a team if you can't lead yourself. And so one of the other aspects I want to throw in there is emotional intelligence, and I would divide that into two components. One is self-awareness, the consciousness that you need to lead yourself, and what are you doing, and how are you responding to events, and what's up with you? And then self-regulation. Can you, no matter what's going on, be present in the circumstance as it exists and handle it in a positive and productive way for yourself as well as for everybody else? And part of why that's so important, I like your image of rowing the boat. And if you think about, a crew team, there's somebody calling the pace, and everybody has to be exactly on pace. And there's an aspect of leadership that is very much like that, and that's consistency. Yes. Can your folks count on you to show up as yourself within a particular range every day so they know who they're dealing with? We have all either had a leader or known a leader, and I hope it isn't any of us, who
I raised my hand. That's why she's laughing, because early in my career, I'll admit it. Because,
there are departments where the folks show up in the morning and they're asking each other, okay, who is she today? How is she today? They have to know how to deal with you. The kind of handbook to the leader being able to explain, and even silly things like, if you come and talk to me before I've had 2 cups of coffee, you're less likely to get an answer you want. So if it's an emergency, absolutely. But otherwise, it's better to give me those 20 minutes and know I can really focus on you. Now that sounds personal, and it may even sound kind of dumb, and you may think it's childish and not good self-control. But in fact, extending that sense of, oh, as the leader, I'm a human too, is one piece. And the other is, here's the truth about dealing with me I want you to know, because then we'll all be our best, and I want to know the truth about dealing with you.
So huge. So huge.
Yeah.
Well, I think the key is really, like you said, it's being real. And as leaders, you don't have to put a front on. And when you do put a front, and early in my career, I raised my hand because I was doing that. I was putting that front. I had to be this certain person. And that's that emotional intelligence side that you talked about of self-awareness and self-regulation. Because when you become yourself, number one, you don't have to work very hard at it. It's who you are. And now let's understand, we do believe sometimes we have to modify our behaviors, because there was behaviors I had that I needed to modify, but I was willing to do that. I have an employee still today, or she's not an employee anymore, but a friend now. She's a friend. Every time we get together, and she'll tell me, she goes, "You were really a jerk back then." And we laugh about it, and I laugh about it, and I said, yes. And she'll always come back and say, but you were willing to change. And that's what I respect so much, because you changed so much over the years as you learn more about leadership. And really, as leaders, we don't have it all figured out.
No.
That's why we want you listening to podcasts. Same way with your, we can apply this at home as a parent. It's not like you're just automatically a parent and they've given you this manual and this is how it works. Your children gives you challenges every day, but how are you willing to respond to those challenges that's there? That's the communication that makes the difference there. I just think it's so important for leaders to hear, because it's about the willingness to change and become the person and being real with people. Because like you said, if I'm not a morning person, which I am, but if I'm not a morning person and I'm that leader, let them get in their office, let them get set up. And don't set up an 8 o'clock staff meeting when you're rushing to get there at 8 o'clock and you're frustrated already to start out with. And then you're going to start that meeting. Start that meeting then at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, whatever fits your schedule that's best there. So I love that. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think it comes into my next question that I kind of wanted to share with you is, you talk a lot about, why do you feel organizational culture is so important? Because of course it comes from the leaders, but it has to be everyone in the organization. You said that in the very beginning, but it's so critical today because it allows us to get more work done. I know, but I'm just curious how you feel on organizational culture, why it's so important.
I think of it as what exists. I mean, it's the water we swim in effect. It is the environment as much as the tools or equipment or other surroundings in which you do your job. And those are either supportive of the work or not supportive of the work. And this is a very significant thing in terms of what sets up the bad kinds of conflict. Not the kind that I think you were referring to earlier, where sometimes we have different points of view and we have to find a way to work those out. And that might be called discussion, or it might be called conflict. Often we name it conflict if we think it involves negative emotions, anger and fear, if we're afraid we're going to lose something, as opposed to reaching the best possible joint conclusion. So that's why we think of conflict as negative. We think of pain and suffering coming along with it. But if you think of it as working things through together, then again, it goes back to what's the reality of what we're putting on the table. And the reason that the culture has so much impact is the culture is holding all the behaviors from the beginning of time of the organization, the history, the patterns and norms, the old rules for doing things that nobody's done for 20 years, but they are still embedded in the culture. It could be as simple and as odd as you leased a chunk of a building that has a weird hallway, and so everybody does this strange half turn to get around that corner in the hallway. You could move somewhere else and you almost reset things so that departments are lined up in the same kind of relationship, and you keep the same kind of weird half twist in there. Well, we do that in our behaviors also, and once we learn them as part of the team, we keep them even when they're not relevant anymore. So sometimes the conflict we're having is not actually about today's world. It's about all the stuff we've dragged with us from the past, and then we get irritated at each other because today isn't working as well as it should. And the problem is that we feel personal about it. We think the conflict is between the people who are trying to work things out, and we don't explore deeply enough why we might feel like we're against each other, as opposed to just both sides trying to do what's best for the business.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Is conflict in the workplace is a real challenge, and sometimes it's the smaller things. And then one that I see a lot is people just want to ignore the conflict. They don't want to. They don't want to tackle it, because I don't want to make that person mad, but they're mad at them. but they don't want to have the conversation and really the communication that we go back to there. What would you suggest in those type of areas where, it could be the leader that is ignoring the conflict that they know that's on some of their team? And of course, it affects culture. It affects everything we've talked about, highly productive teams. It affects everything in the organization. And of course, what it starts to do, it starts to affect everyone else on the team also, because they either want to ignore those people or they want to try to get sides. They're
Right.
trying to pick sides for them. What can you do in those situations where you have a leader that's maybe ignoring some of those conflict situations that's within their teams?
I agree with you. It is actually most likely to be the leader who's ignoring it.
Yes.
And sometimes they're ignoring it for the same reason the rest of us do. I don't want to be in pain and I don't want to cause pain. Maybe if I don't look, it will work itself out and go away and I won't have to do anything. That's a big one. Another one is the false idea that we're all grown-ups here. We ought to be able to handle ourselves. You could bury yourself on that one.
Yes.
So one of the ways to get yourself off that hook is to think, I don't have to inflict pain. I don't have to upset somebody else or make them angry. I can go in, and now I have the huge advantage of being able to refer to my own habit. I can go in and be curious. I can say, gee, I wonder why this is happening. Will you please explain it to me? Instead of going in and saying, why did you do this terribly stupid thing? Neutral statements that lay out what the behavior was or what the actual language was, and that ask about it. Can you tell me about it? I wonder why this happened. What happened just before this that made you think that was going to help? Those kinds of questions get people to tell you what's going on. Then you can think about what to do. In fact, you don't even have to respond right then. You can say, oh, that's so interesting. I had no idea. Let me think about that. And if you think of something we could do better, I hope you'll tell me. So then you're opening it. The first thing is to open it, as opposed to coming in like you're loaded for bear and you're going to nail it. If you think you are the one who's going to nail it to the ground, that's when you really can hurt people, and you can bloody yourself in the process too.
Yeah, I think that's really critical there, is understanding what's the perceptions, what's some of the emotions that they have in the conflict versus I'm going to solve it right away as a leader, is just getting an understanding of it. Let's just be clear. We all agree that ignoring it doesn't make it go away. And that's the biggest thing I want a leader to hear, or even if it's with your spouse or significant other. If you have a conflict going on, yeah, you can go to bed that night or you can ignore it all day in the office. It is still happening and it's still going on. So as a leader, we have to be proactive. And that's one of the roles of the leader. But like you said, Liz, it's not like you have to solve it that minute. Get the information and move forward there. Liz, as we move forward, it's amazing because when we get in a conversation we love and communication is flowing, it seems to go very fast. But before we kind of get to that wrap-up time, I want you to share with them kind of from your, you've done some TEDx speaking, you write articles for Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and those. Just share with us kind of at the end is for leaders and individuals, what can they continue to do to move forward? Because I think some people are looking at, since it's the new year, how can I be that better leader? And even if you don't have that title, again, the leader for themselves, what's some suggestions that maybe things you've already covered, but what would be some suggestions you would tell them to really do for themselves to be a better communicator?
Actually, I want to give them a completely different thought. Because when you start off the new year, in a way, you can wipe the slate clean and start fresh. And to think about, is this a problem worth addressing? Is this something where I have to go put on my curiosity and compassion skills? I want to suggest a behavior of pattern recognition. And the reason I say that is whether it is purely interpersonal or whether it's a work project kind of issue, if something makes you feel funny, off, something's not right once, you don't have to do anything right that minute. You just note it. When something happens a second time, it's smart, actually, to say to yourself, this actually bothers me. Let me think about why it bothers me, and let me be on the lookout for it. By the time it happens a third time, you've got a pattern, and it's time to get active. And whether that's with yourself or with someone else, that's the point at which, if you start ignoring it, it goes underground, and it starts to have impact on the rest of your day, the rest of your relationships, everything else that's going on. But if you look for that pattern and identify it and then take steps to do something about it, you can actually eliminate it before it becomes horribly negative.
I'd love that, because it not will only help you in the moment, it's going to help you for the rest of this year. And since we've started a new decade, let's talk about it. It could totally change yourself in the next decade of how you're looking at things in each of those areas. Well, some great information you shared. And like I said, I could continue on because I love this topic. And I think it's one, to be quite honest, when you talk about workplace culture and communication and conflict, it's one of those that organizations, as individuals, we've got to become better at. And we can always improve, no matter where you're at. Even if you think you're a 9.5, well, there's room for improvement. And most likely, if you talk to some other folks that knew you well, they wouldn't rate you as a 9.5. So that's the challenge that you have. Liz, before we go into what I call the recharge round, I would like you to share with them, you have kind of a free ebook on your website about interpersonal conflict at work. And if they want that information, share with them your website and how they could access that information.
Oh, sure. The website is www.lizkislik.com. That's LIZKIS as in Sam, LIK.com. And you can get the ebook there, and it has a bunch of road-tested tips and techniques for dealing with the interpersonal aspects of conflict, because those are a pain in the neck too. Yep. And you can also, same place, get my weekly blogs or my monthly newsletter if you like this kind of material about culture and interaction and moving forward at work.
And there's some great articles on there. I looked at your website before we spoke and as I was doing my research, and she's got some great information on there. So I'd totally tell you, go check that out. And remember, we will have it in show notes, because if you're running right now or you're exercising or doing something that you can't write it down, all that is in show notes at chargepodcast.com. So how you get to Liz's website will be there, and we'll make sure that's identified for you. So don't hesitate. Don't think that right now. If you're driving, we don't want you writing. We want you listening. So we will have all that information there. Well, Liz, let's go into the recharge round. I ask every guest these questions because they're kind of my framework, what I talk about and speak a lot with audiences. And I love getting feedback from other people, how they feel it makes a difference there. We talked about this some, but I want you to share again how you believe your mindset affects your daily living.
I think looking for the good helps you find the good, and that helps you feel better. And you can just do more when you feel better. So it's kind of a virtuous cycle.
Great. How do you bring energy into your life? And let's use the example I've been using more. It's easy on the days we're charged up and maybe we like speaking. So doing podcasts today, it was easier for me to get out of the bed and get ready to be able to do a podcast. But the days that maybe it's a little bit, you don't have the energy. What do you do to kind of charge yourself up to make sure you can still accomplish what you need to accomplish?
I think there are two things. One is physical and one is more emotional, psychological. A little exercise helps get you going, whether it's stretching or walking a little, or I love the mornings that I have a trainer and I weight train. That gives you real energy, and you got to take care of the body because it carries your mind around. And for the mind, learning something, anything new information, that's fabulous for me.
Well, I think that's so true. And I tell you, with us starting the new year, Charger is one thing we've talked about a lot. We share a lot of book recommendations. I would tell you, pick up a book that you haven't picked up just on something that you want to learn. Maybe it's on communication. Get Liz's free ebook that she has there and just read through that. And I will tell you, the more you learn, the more it engages the mind and just really kind of sets you on the pace. And you all have heard me speak enough about exercise and how important that is. And I just think if you're struggling right now because it's the new part of the year and you told yourself you were just going to start to, I'm going to take a piece from James Clear's Atomic Habits here. What I want you to do is, if you've struggled and you've stopped going to the gym, what I want you to do is just this next week, pick 3 days that you're going to go to the gym, put your clothes out, put them on. If you're going to shower there, that's fine. Take them with you, but then go to the gym and walk for just 5 minutes and then finish it. And if you've stopped exercising, just do the 5 minutes, walk around the track, whatever you need to do, get on the treadmill for 5 minutes, not 10, not 15, 5 minutes, and then go back, shower, leave, and then come back and do it again. And start a cycle. What you're trying to do is start the cycle. Next week, maybe you move up to 10 minutes. And I guarantee you, if you make small incremental steps, you're going to see that habit will come there. I want that for you because Liz knows how much energy means and exercise means to her. I know how much it means to me. It will change the other piece because what you'll do, you will want to learn more because your mind will be running faster. And energy doesn't take effort, it actually gives you more energy. And a good friend of mine, Brendan Bouchard, a mentor, says the power plant doesn't have energy, it creates it. And you've got to create that energy in your life. So sorry to go on that rampage, but man, it's the beginning of the year. I know somebody's struggling right now because we make a lot of New Year's resolution and then we stop doing it. What's the number one connection or relationship that's made the biggest impact on your life?
Actually, I think having my kids. Because you learn all over again what's important to you and what you think good behavior is, and you really recognize the value of another human being and being attentive to them and their needs.
Yes.
Big lessons there.
Oh, yes. And then the different stages, if they're newborns versus when they become adults. We talked about some of that before we went online. It changes everything too. That is a great one. How about, what's the advice that's influenced you the most in your life?
There is a Talmudic principle that says you are not obligated to complete the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. In other words, do your part. You may not be able to save the world, but there is a part that is yours. Get up and go do it.
Oh, we could stop right there, but we got still 2 more questions. Do your part. I love that. Recommend a book and share why you love it.
And it's great for what you just said about starting off the year. It's called The Art of the Possible, and it's by Rosamund and Benjamin Zander. And I have found, I read this probably once a year, I skim it, because it just has the most inspiring content about how to encourage yourself and others to give their best.
Excellent. We will have that again in show notes, so you'll be able to go there. There'll be a link for you. If you want to check out that book, that's available to you. My last question, you just about made it through the recharge round, is one sentence. What legacy do you want to leave the world, Liz?
I want it to be clear that I helped people make things better.
That's excellent. And she's definitely made us better today by being on the Charge podcast. So we can't thank you enough for saying yes to being on the Charge podcast and join us. Share with them again one more time your website. And there's an ebook there as well as newsletters you can sign up to if you want so they can get that information again, Liz.
It's www.lizkislik.com.
So remember, you can go there to get that information. And really, if you're struggling right now in some communication areas or maybe some conflict with work or home, I would suggest that you check it out because she's got a lot of resources on her website. And she did that to make it for us to be able to help us in those situations that we're having. And she's working with organizations all the time. There's some great articles that she's had on Harvard and Forbes and some of the other magazines. So please check out her work. I think you're going to love it. Liz, I can't thank you enough for joining us here on the Charge Podcast. I can't believe it's 2020 already and we started a new decade, but it's going to be an exciting year and it's going to be an exciting decade. And I just thank you for joining us.
So happy to be with you, Gary, and here's to the year ahead.
Chargers, let's go out. I know you may have lost a little bit momentum. Well, today you've heard some great information to be able to get that momentum started again and take them small steps to create what you want. Remember, it's not about perfection. It's about the journey we're on, and are we willing to continue that journey as we move forward? So as you go out today, I want you to really think about what is the action step from the conversation I heard. Maybe you have a friend, maybe you have a spouse, maybe you have a coworker that you need to have that conversation with. Well, we would challenge you, let's go have that conversation. Let's get this discussion so we can move forward in that relationship. Until we resolve it, it's going to always be, it's going to not help us move forward. So we have to help ourselves move forward. So what are you going to do today to do that? So I want to tell you, we're going to have more guests that we're going to share with you to keep giving you information each and every day to make us better. So I want you to come back. One thing that you could do for us is like and share the podcast with others, because that's how people really hear about it, is by one-on-one reach out and someone say, if you listen to this podcast, maybe you share it. Maybe you've got a leader that you need to share it with and you're not sure how in communication. Just, hey, there's a new podcast I started listening to. There's some great information. I listened to this podcast here with Liz and I thought it might be beneficial to you. And then let them take it from there. And of course, if you can rate and review the podcast, we always appreciate that too. So Chargers, we're glad that you came back and we're glad it's a new year and we can't wait to see you back here next week. Go out and make it a great day. We'll see you next week.
This podcast has ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.